Hello, welcome to Mythopoeia, episode 2 for superheroes. My name is Chris.
My name is Jim. Yay! We're back.
We are back. Double guns. That's how back we are.
Wow, Chris, are you gonna show us your guns?
Now,
No.
please, there's not enough room for my big head enough.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. All right.
So, last episode we went through and decided on superhero worlds.
Yeah. So we're
This.
gonna start with
Mhm.
superhero.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying we're gonna start with superhero, and we're gonna talk about a couple of different things today.
So, one of the big things we're going to talk about genres and the game systems themselves.
Yeah, I think it's useful to go back and just talk about like superhero has some really specific things about its genre that I think it's important to decide on. I think these things kind of fall in a spectrum, um, and I just think it's useful for us to figure out for the world we want to do. What do we want to do with those genre expectations? I do have a question though for you, Chris. Before we start this, though,
Aye, Captain.
um, this is the kind of thing I think is always interesting to talk about. How much player input do you give the player group or the player base before you start? Like you come up and you say you're going to run superhero, you pitch the game. How much of these things that we're going to talk about do you get player input, and how much do you come to the table with decided on?
So, for me personally, 99% already decided.
Sure, sure.
Now, Mhm.
You sort of already know what you want the game to look like in style wise,
Yes.
stylistic.
And I'm the person that, when I was in a superhero world, I have a timeline. I know when heroes appeared. I know when things happened. I have designed actual timelines of major events and how they affected the world.
Do you
Now,
have that
mhm,
before you pitch?
yeah, unfortunately I do. I design,
Unfortunately.
yeah, I'm kind of limited that way. When I have an idea, I want to create the world.
Okay.
So most of my games, when I've designed them, I've said, okay, what's the concept behind this game? This game is, in superhero worlds, it's always the Superman that makes the differences. I want to make the world where the Tony Stark and the Reed Richards make the difference, where the intellect wins.
Okay.
So everything is about the scientist and the mad scientist. That's why in that world there were flying cars, there were domed cities.
Sure.
They made more impact than anyone else.
Sure. So you sort of have that set before you pitch the idea to the players. How much of that information do you try to give the players? Is it like a elevator pitch of like some of the things that we're going to go through, like hitting some of the high points, and then have people make characters, or do you lay all that out for everyone?
I will tell you the truth. I have as much information as the players can stomach.
Okay.
You generally will stomach more of it. Mark generally will stomach none of it.
Right. Fair enough. Um, I think I probably fall more towards your spectrum in terms of like, I think some of these things that we're going to talk about in terms of genre expectation,
Mm-hmm.
I think I have some idea for a lot of them. Um, yeah, I think I have some idea for a lot of them, and that I'm going to make just those kind of my pitch points. I don't think I do. I vacillate. Sometimes I do a lot like you do, and sometimes depending. And this for me is more about time constraint.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing, and how collaborative I'm kind of in the mood to be, because I think, as I've gotten, I don't know, gamer old. Is that a thing? Is gamer old
Yeah.
a thing? Okay. As I have gotten gamer age, gamer years,
Mm-hmm.
um, I have come to perform more and more collaborative games. Um, and so I think that's made me maybe do a little less prep. So, um, I think a lot of these things I come decided because they're pretty high points. Like I sort of know some basic things about the
Yeah.
world I want to run. Like, what's my game going to be about? Is it about the apocalypse? If so, what does that look like? Um, Is it going to be about, the fall of the Roman Empire in fantasy or whatever? Um, and so I have some of the genre expectations laid out. I think it's particularly important for superhero to make some of those things explicit in your pitch.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, because there are so many genre things about superheroes specifically. Um, and if you're going to buck some of those, or you're going to go a specific direction, I think it's useful for the players to know that. Otherwise, I think you're going to be unhappy with their characters. They're going to be unhappy with their characters, or they're just going to be unhappy with the game. Um, However, that said, there's a couple of things in these genre expectations I'm willing to let the players decide.
Okay.
So let's kind of go through maybe some of those. So I think the first one is more, I always feel like in superhero, there's a spectrum of humor to serious.
Yeah.
So I think about, like, if you think about the middle line, I would say Spider-Man is the middle line. Because Spider-Man does do some really serious stuff. With great power comes great responsibility. That's weighty.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yet he's uses levity all the time. Like, humor is an intrinsic part of his character. And so he's the person, that comic is the person that I think of as like, okay, that's the middle line.
Yeah.
And you go one way or the other on terms of levity or humor. So, and I think you see people like, Batman, the X-Men go definitely way darker, way more serious. And you see, I don't know, things like, gosh, I'm trying to think of something that's more light.
Well,
Um,
there is a bunch that can do very light. So there's a lot that follows, especially in Marvel. They do a lot of kind of the funny. They're Guardians of the Galaxies. Even though it's very
yeah,
dark, it does still have, how they design Quell now as being kind of that intergalactic mischief maker.
yep,
But then you
yeah,
have full on, like DC has done a couple things, like what was it when they did Justice League Antarctica and stuff like that.
yes. I was about to say Booster Gold and Blue Beetle. There was an era there where they were definitely, they could have serious stories, but they
Mm-hmm.
were from this humor lens.
Yep.
Um, and that didn't make them not good stories. It was just a stylistic choice, I think. So I think that's important to kind of pick. So where do you fall on this, Chris, for this world? Where do you feel like you gravitate towards?
I have a tendency to be on the serious side of serious or humorous. I will. I have learned over the years I'm gonna have to let humor through, or it'll just bug me to death.
Sure.
I think I can make characters that are funny and stuff like that, and I think through things, but spur of the moment, I'm not always humorous, maybe witty. Yeah.
I would say you're witty. I think our group is fairly witty. Um,
So
I,
let's say serious humor,
serious humor. Okay, I
Guardians of the
definitely
Galaxy style.
Guardians of the Galaxy style. I think I actually, my tendency is to fall more serious than even that. I do want some levity in my game. I do want some lightness.
Hmm.
But I probably go more serious than that, even most of the time. Um, I think, like you want this to be fun. I
Yeah.
want this to be fun, and I think our I don't know, our particular play group lends towards um, just poking fun at the game sometimes,
Yeah.
even if it's particularly serious. And I think if the game already has some element of levity in it, it holds that better.
Okay.
Um, and it's more fun for everyone. You know, so sometimes to work the out of game humor into the game itself is fun to do.
Hmm.
A lot, like your getaway office. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yep. And see, that's one of those things in the past that would have drove me nuts. I just had to accept it. And okay, I'm just going with the humor on this one. You win.
Yep, you win. Getaway office. um,
Or the escape robot.
or the escape robot, right? The building that's actually an escape robot is ridiculous. The villain who has cheerleaders. I mean, I think there are moments I think where levity is totally good to insert into the game,
Hmm.
but I think the themes of my games tend to be towards the more serious. So,
So building off that, there's another category. It's
okay,
not humorous and serious. It's light and dark.
yeah,
It's
I would
now
agree
a
with that.
lot of this has to do with what kind of style you're going to play, but it's is this, some dark Punisher story where it's just grayscale, or not even grayscale, or it's just dark and bloody
Dark.
and violent? Or is it just a humorous? Justice League, I don't know now, but in the past, they've always been more on the light scale. Things turn your way.
Yeah.
And the middle one is the grayscale, where it's generally not going to kill you, but you have to be conscious about it.
I definitely prefer grayscale.
Me too. I do not like the just full on darkness of it, but I
I don't
also
like the
I don't like the Pollyanna either. There's got to be some impact.
um. I just don't buy the Pollyanna. Like that's just not. I mean, obviously this is a role playing game and it's fictional and all of those things. But I think for people to enjoy and buy in, there has to be some vermislitude in some
Hmm.
way. Even if it's a ridiculous, oh, look, people can fly around, then I think it's even more important to me to have some sort of connection to some form of reality. And when bad things happen, and it's always Pollyanna,
Hmm.
that's just hard to swallow a little bit. Um, I don't mind characters that are idealists,
Of course, those are
but
essential.
I want that even them to have some sort of impact or be impacted by the grayscale that the game is about. Um, but I'm with you. Like, by the same token,
Hmm.
I don't always just buy the super dark stuff. Like, not to name names, Garth Ennis. Um, I
Yeah,
actually actively hate that. I think it's yeah, I just don't. Uh, that's actually
it's
even less interesting to me than the Pollyanna.
yeah. That's one of the issues I always had with the Ultimates.
Yeah.
It just
Yep.
you're just doing this now for the sake of doing it. There's no law. You're just being as unrealistic as light is.
And then there's absolutely no room for levity ever.
Hmm.
And that's just not a story I don't think is sustainable. I don't know, in my personal opinion. So, I know that there are fans of that kind of thing out there.
Oh
I
yeah,
am not.
exactly.
Um, and for those who are, no offense, but that's not my preference. And so, I would prefer we definitely go grayscale.
I agree.
Okay. Um, and then again, I think the more serious side of levity is probably there. I think you need to have room for a Spider-Man, but maybe not a Squirrel Girl.
Hmm. Yeah,
or maybe not even a Deadpool, who I think is dark levity. I
yeah,
mean,
no,
that's just ridiculous. And eh,
agreed.
um, all right. So, uh, costumes or no?
Truthfully, I think that depends on not just the genre and the styles. I personally like the concept of costumes for two reasons. One of them is basically government sanctioned heroes. We already know the military wears uniforms and cops wear uniforms.
So
So,
when the costume is uniform,
mhm. And then I also do generally like it for other reasons. It's hard to explain why it is for the characters.
for me, it's when the costume is supposed to represent some sort of symbolism. So the best example I can think of this out of hand is Batman. his costume is designed to intimidate people.
Mm-hmm.
It's designed for a purpose. It's also designed to be a symbol for um, a different kind of symbol, right? Like, um, don't do this or else. I'm the boogeyman. Um, and so I think when the costume embodies like something important about what's going on with the hero and
Yeah.
there's some intentionality behind it, it makes a lot of sense to me. I think when it's a uniform, it makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I prefer not to costume otherwise.
Okay.
Um, so that's what I would say. I would say maybe, yeah, costumes in our world, but if we're going to do a costume, I think we should think about that. Like, what is that costume supposed to be and why? Why do they have one?
Yeah. So the next one
Uh,
I think also kind of fits into style and, humorous or serious. Knocked out or super lethal.
This is one where I think players make a lot of decision for me because I tend to operate, and because I guess we're going to operate in the gray.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think I'm willing to let the players decide this. I think there's a couple of checks and balances on this for me.
Yeah.
Because it's grayscale, if they just decide to be murder hobo heroes, there are going to be consequences for that.
Yeah.
Um, Probably even the people that they're supposed to be helping or the governments that they're on the side of or whatever, they're going to start to see them as more threatening.
Okay.
When, the more somebody uses their laser vision to cut buildings in half and drop them on their enemies to kill them, the more people are going to be like, well, yeah, he did that to the bad guy, but what's to stop him from doing that to me?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think to me, if it's something that happens and there seems to be there should always be consequences, even if it doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
Um, and that doesn't always mean everyone's going to automatically turn against them or hate them. People might be like, yeah, you did the right thing. And people might be out for blood after that. Like,
I mean, the 20th time Batman didn't kill the Joker. That's when people are going, okay.
right, right. Why don't you do that? Yeah. Um, you had one that you brought up when we were discussing this that was really interesting to me, just in terms of how the villains see it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which, yeah, go ahead.
Well, that they react to the heroes. If they realize the heroes are going to go for blood, they might do the same thing. Other than that, they understand it's a job.
Right. Yeah, like if there's a thing where, the heroes are going to arrest them or detain them or, make them pay for their crimes, then there's less impetus to eliminate the hero in some way or less impetus to murder their family,
Yep.
you know. But, if you go around killing villains, you might get yourself a partner in the refrigerator or mom in the refrigerator or, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that might just happen to you. Um, and that can definitely make the game go. But I also think then balancing that on the other consequences, what are the good guys saying about that? Why are you escalating things in this way? People are starting to fear us. You're starting a war rather than policing things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those kinds of questions. So for me, this is actually more shades of gray. Like if you're going to go gray, I think you have to some degree, let the players decide. And give them some agency in this. But also, like, if somebody's going to make the Punisher and be a murder hobo hero, and I'm not running a super dark game, um, uh, one, you're sort of breaking the contract of what we talked about with the game at the beginning, and two, expect some pretty dire consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've made a character who doesn't really care about that, or you've made the total murder hobo who just doesn't care, you're just the Punisher who's out for vengeance, and because your family's dead, but you have nothing more to lose, so nothing matters. Then one, that's kind of an uninteresting character to me, and two, um, you haven't really gone with the setting.
No, I agree.
So, I think we'd be having to talk about that in character creation.
Yep.
Um, I think that again leads into this: are heroes in general admired or feared?
And I
Like, how
think
does powers?
I think that kind of depends on the hero. They've always done this weird thing, especially like on DC. So you have the Flash, and for the longest time, the Flash always had the Flash Museum. He was loved in his city. But then they started to darken him up at different times, and that's come and gone a couple different times.
Yeah. Um, I think of things more like in general. Am I thinking like, am I telling an X-Men story or am I telling a Justice League story?
Hmm.
Um, I think the Avengers have blurred the lines in both of those things. Um, but the X-Men really is about the government's reaction to mutant kind. I mean, just think about its fundamental stories with Magneto and Xavier. Um, it is about, at its core, a story about prejudice.
Yeah.
And so um, society displays that. Like, that's its bent. Is it always that way? No. Is that the way society's going to lean for the purposes of their story? Yes. And so I guess that's more what I'm talking about is how do we want, is there a leaning? Um, is there a leaning toward admiration or is there a leaning towards um, stigmatization? Um,
I think, personally for me, I think that might come down to kind of the classes of heroes, maybe
sure.
leaning more toward stigmatization.
Yeah. Um, I've always been a little bit more in the admiration camp on that spectrum, slightly in the admiration camp, because I think there's complexity you can do with that there too. Like that's
Hmm.
not always a good thing.
Well,
A good example of that is like Kingdom Come.
I actually kind of put it in the athlete.
Yeah. Yep.
The Sunday they win the big game, they are loved. After that, if they haven't won for a while,
Yeah. No, that's good.
the one
That's good.
thing
So
shows up, and the story comes out, some horrible story about them. Of course, it's going to go to hatred.
yeah.
We like our heroes to fall.
Yeah. I was thinking for this game, I'd like it to be really modern. And I would like to maybe try to do a millennial take on fame
Okay.
for the public. So maybe it's really quick. Maybe it's about internet trolls. Maybe it's about you know, what happened today in the new media cycle. Maybe it's um, maybe the value is on things like um, and when I say, modern millennial, I'm definitely talking about American millennials.
Hmm.
But maybe there's this underwriting value of social justice, but also this, what have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
Kind of push pull. And so I think it'd be interesting to try to have some of that come out in this game, like have modern media be a big part of how people are viewing what's going on. And I don't know that that's been a huge take necessarily, because there's some subtlety there.
Hmm.
Like, oh look, the internet outed you. Might as well not wear that mask anymore, right? Like,
Yep.
or you got in a Twitter fight with a follower and suddenly everyone rages on you. Like, I just think I think that'd be an interesting take.
Yep. I agree.
Oh, look, are you like videoing yourself? Are you YouTube are you managing your online persona? Um,
Did you get all the rights of your superhero name?
no, Absolutely. I I think that would be a really interesting take, especially that push pull between, oh, I want social justice and I want you to maybe take care of me.
Hmm.
You're not going to take care of me. I have a problem with that. So yeah,
So I think that's the basic until we actually decide on an actual setting and time period and everything like that. So a
yes,
quick just discussion. This is what we're going to do. By default, we're going to design these characters in a couple different systems.
yep,
After looking through them, we're going to go with Mutants and Masterminds 3rd Edition. It's right now the game I have the most knowledge of. I have the
yeah, and yep, yep,
um, icons. I've been kind of working on a point by system because there's some aspects of it I have issues with, but a point by system will help it. And then I'm a Savage Worlds superhero.
yeah. I think what's interesting to me about those choices, one of the reasons I like those choices is because they're generic,
Hmm.
and even something like Champions, I think you can get caught into the problem of established universe.
Yeah.
Uh, I've never found that enjoyable. Not as a player, not as a game master. Either the players disappoint me, or as the player, I'm like, well, what does what I do matter when Superman's going to come along?
Hmm.
Or you're not going to let me, have any impact on the X-Men? Or, I mean, like,
Hmm.
there's too much sacred ground with established universe that just gets in the way. Um, and these are really, to me, flexible systems. Like, I think you need to be flexible in your system to have crazy kinds of powers.
Yep. Now,
Um,
I might go back and make some of the characters in Champions Online or Champions Complete, just because that's old school for me, and I want to see if I can make things again in it.
yes.
And masks. Masks should take no time. Masks are not about the characters; it's more what they do. So I have a
Yeah,
feeling masks will be simple to do, but also not really worth it majorly.
yeah. I think part of what we're going to do too, or part of what we are going to do, not I think, is as we discuss things and we talk about kind of how to systematize them, um, we will make those PDFs available that we do for Patreon users. So join our Patreon page or join us, support us on
Right
Patreon
there.
because you will get right there. Um, because you will get access to those PDFs. We're going to try to provide you some extra content that way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so support us and get that stuff as we start doing it.
Cool, cool. Well, that's all we have for Mythopoeia in episode 2. In episode 3, time to get down to the time period we're putting in and the power, the origin of superheroes.
Yeah, yeah,
Enjoy, Twitter and
yeah.
Facebook, Patreon, working on Patreon.
And you're welcome, Internet.
Bye bye. Bye bye.